Ollie, will this prompt then the US to send its Patriot system to Poland? And does the US have enough to do that?
Well, listen, the United States has shown a lot of support for Poland, particularly in the last week when you had the president of Poland, the newly elected president, visiting Donald Trump. And in fact, Donald Trump pledged something that he really would probably not pledge to any other European allies, which was to potentially increase the U.S. troop presence within Poland, because, of course, there are already 10,000 troops within Poland. And we know the Trump administration wants to actually withdraw troops from Europe. But he's saying, you know, moving the opposite direction in the case of Poland. And just to get an update in terms of what we know from these drone strikes, so we've learned a lot over the last 24 hours. You can see there, so there will be pictures of the Poles that are still getting debris, picking up sort of various bits of drones that fell across Poland. We should say that some of these drones went into Poland up to 250 kilometers west of Warsaw. So this is a serious incursion. And according to the Poles, there were 19 breaches, registered violations of their airspace. And for many of the commentators from Poland and from Europe to say that, you know, this has happened from time to time, violations of Polish airspace, but the volume at which it happened, this is really something that is unprecedented, A, and B, difficult to see how it could be entirely by accident. The Russians, for their part, have given a lot of mixed commentary on this. There were some early sort of messages from some of the military personnel in Russia. Then eventually the Kremlin spokesman, Dmitry Peskov, came out and basically refused to comment on the incident. But for the Poles, as you can imagine, Tom, this really drives home the threat that exists in the east. They are calling for more Patriot defense missiles, a drone wall to sort of be assembled on the eastern flank of Poland. And of course, this is a conversation you have fairly frequently on the Baltic. But we should also say this does not stop here, Tom. We've had Donald Tusk, the Prime Minister of Poland, speaking more openly in recent months about the possibility of Poland either developing, you know, some kind of nuclear arsenal or having access to nuclear deterrent. This is very present in the minds of the Poles and just driven home once again over the last 24 hours.
And meanwhile, Ollie, the EU has said it will ramp up sanctions. Can they do that? Will Hungary sign off on additional sanctions on Russia? And will it actually make a material difference on the battlefield?
Yeah, so this is their 19th sanction package that they're trying to work out right now. I'm trying to get through the EU. And as you say, you know, the sort of the difficulty has always been Hungary in sort of getting these, which requires unanimity. The difference that you have now is, A, well, the French and the Germans are really sort of spearheading, trying to get a lot more sanctions on some of the biggest Russian oil majors, Lukoil, Rosneft, targeting the shadow fleet. But as we know, Tom, this has been the sort of goal since the very beginning of the war. There has been some success, but there's really reaching diminishing returns. Where things get interesting is now you have much more active consultations between the EU and the Trump administration. As we know, the Trump administration has had very sort of little desire to coordinate with European allies in the past. That is currently happening. But as we know, sort of from over the last 24 hours, Trump himself had basically put an offer on the table to the Europeans, said, listen, EU, if you sanction China and you sanction India, you put tariffs on them for buying crude oil and fossil fuels from Russia, we will follow you into that. That is probably a little bit too rich on the risk appetite for the Europeans to follow, but at least it begins a conversation with the Trump administration in terms of how to create an architecture to constrict some of that money flowing into Russia. And to answer your second question, Tom, the question about whether or not this is going to actually hurt and this is going to actually make a difference, in the long term, yes, if they can get effective sanctions to sort of limit the money flowing into Russia. But in the short term, Tom, this is a war that Russia is very committed to. It's insulated itself well to. And so to have an immediate effect, it's going to be very hard to see how that can happen.